What is the most compelling argument for God's existence? Every single day, I'm trying to find good arguments for God's existence. It's not that I want to not believe in God or, anything like that. Like, if God does exist and somebody has a solid argument for it, I want to know about it. And if it can convince me, then it should convince me. And I would want to have my worldview be as close to reality as possible. And if God's part of that reality, I want to know about it. That's why today we're going to be looking at William Lane Craig telling us what the most compelling argument for God is. Ben Shapiro wanted to know, so he asked him, and this is one of the most popular videos that comes up in my searches. So if you want to fuck around and find out what the most compelling argument for God is, then please stay tuned. What's up, heathens? How y'all doing? I'm the Godless Engineer, and I critically analyze apologist claims to give you the best arguments and information so that you can stand up and use your voice. Like I said, today we're taking a look at Low Bar Bill Craig as he gives us the most compelling argument for God's existence. I don't really have a lot of high hopes for this because everything that I've seen out of William Lane Craig has not been the top tier of arguments for God. They actually seem quite lazy in their argumentation, and they make a lot of logical leaps. So I'm not really expecting a whole hell of a lot more out of Bill Craig, but I'm willing to give him another chance. All right, heathens, let's see what Low Bar Bill has for us.
Well, one of the things I think that's happened in the religious community is you see people who are brought up in religious homes and they're taught the stories of the Bible. They're never taught any deeper philosophy or theology that attaches to that. So they have sort of a children's eyes view of what God is and how to think about God. You sort of think of God still as the old man in the sky who's controlling things. What in your opinion is the most reasonable proof of God? What have you found to be the most convincing proof of God's existence?
Well, I like how Ben Shapiro automatically starts this video by sort of poisoning the well against the quote-unquote common Christian, being that those that are brought up in Christian households just have a very infantile view of God. And so basically these people that later leave their religious faiths are somehow leaving with an infantile view of God instead of an educated view of what people say about God or the claims about God, or just that their views have changed and they become convinced of other arguments or other ideas. Starting off this way is not only a poisoning the well fallacy, but it's really just driving a narrative. It's almost like begging the question here. I do have a segment of a video on the Skeptics channel where I deal with the most compelling argument for God's existence according to Ben Shapiro. So I'll be sure to link it down below when that's available if you want to know what Ben Shapiro actually thinks. Now, as far as what Low Bar Bill thinks is compelling, I'm gonna bet that he doesn't have the best argument, and one of the most compelling arguments for him is actually a really weak argument. That's my prediction as to what his argumentation is, but I'm gonna leave it open. I don't mean to poison the well too much against Low Bar Bill here, but I've not really seen a lot of great answers out of Bill Craig. And if you're wondering, I don't find any arguments for God compelling at all, or strong for that matter. They all seem pretty weak, but that weakness is due to their logical leaps that they have to make, or the unsupported premises in their syllogisms or their arguments in general. Like, I feel like they think things are true when they're not actually true, and because of that misrepresentation of the facts, they think that God has been proven. So let's just see what Low Bar Bill has for us.
Well, I think that those are two questions. For me, my favorite argument for the existence of God that I find the most compelling is a version of the cosmological argument, which goes like this. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. Something can't just come into being from nothing.
Well, I would place this in the category of things that Bill Craig thinks is true, but is actually not true. We don't have evidence that things can't come into existence out of nothing, let alone this whole idea of nothing exists in the first place. So he's got a few assumptions here that just don't work well with reality. First off, this nothing that Bill is talking about is an absolute nothing. It means that absolutely nothing is there. But does that actually exist in reality? And what we've come to find scientifically is that this kind of philosophical nothing, this absolute nothing, doesn't practically exist in reality. When we remove all energy out of a certain vacuum, we still have an electrical charge that exists there in that space. So that comes from somewhere. And so it's not nothing. There's still room for work to be done in a space that's had everything removed from it. In theory, something can come out of this scientific version of nothing because it's still something there. And we have, like quantum explanations for how something can come out of nothing, how energy can be produced out of a space that seemingly has nothing in it. So that's one of the things that he has a problem with here. The other thing is that in quantum theory, you don't necessarily need a cause for some kind of event. An event can happen without a cause, or the cause could, come after the event happens. It's a very complicated relationship on a quantum level, and that's where our explanations reside for how this universe could have hopped into existence out of this scientific nothing from a quantum scalar field. So we have to work within that realm of science right there in order to provide these explanations. And switching up the conversation between the quantum area of science and other portions of science, I feel like is equivocating and convoluting the conversation to the point where the person can be easily bamboozled into a wrong position. And I don't know if Bill Craig is trying to do that. I don't know if he's trying to confuse his audience, but the way that he communicates is definitely confusing. I'm not saying that I do better, but at least I understand the science behind what he's falsely claiming.
Secondly, the universe began to exist. I think we have both good philosophical arguments and scientific evidence for the finitude of the past.
Well, so I do agree with an asterisk there, because what we know is that our instance of this universe came into existence at some point in the past, most notably 13.5 billion years ago. We know that that happened because we have scientific evidence for the inflation of the universe. But that doesn't mean that other universes don't exist, and it also doesn't mean that this is the first instance of our universe that has existed. And we don't know in what form our universe existed prior to the inflation, but I feel like any discussion of what the universal reality looked like prior to our universe is just going to be speculation. And I feel like it's always just going to be speculation because there's no way for us to look past the inflation point. We don't know what state reality was in prior to the inflation of our universe. So we can't say with any kind of certainty what any of that looked like prior to the inflation of our universe. It seems to me like Bill is making these wide sweeping generalizations about scientific topics that just don't match what the scientific theories tell us about the beginning of the universe or the inflation of the universe, or how our reality exists in general as far as our universe is concerned. Again, this premise has a lot of assumptions that he's not letting the audience know about that invalidates it as a true premise, and it throws a lot of questions into the mix.
From which it follows, third, therefore the universe has a cause. And when you do a conceptual analysis of what it is to be a cause of the universe, you arrive at a being which is an uncaused, beginningless, timeless, spaceless, enormously powerful, personal creator of the universe.
So this is the kind of logical leap that I'm talking about. Because if you made this into a syllogism, like the Kalam cosmological argument, you could get to there being some kind of cause or explanation for the inflation of the universe. I don't disagree with that particular part, but where William Lane Craig, where his whole explanation kind of goes off the rails here is when he jumps to this personal, timeless, infinite being that made the conscious decision to create this universe. That's the logical leap that happens, because I think that the Kalam cosmological argument can get us back to, something caused the universe to come into existence, but it doesn't tell us what that cause is. You have to make further arguments in order to suggest that it's your particular magical wizard that caused everything to come into existence. And Bill doesn't do that. What he does is he just automatically assumes that it needs to be a sentient being that's timeless and all powerful and loves to watch people jerk off in the middle of the night. He has to assume these things in order to make his argument make sense. That is not a good way to go about arguing for a God existing, making these logical leaps based off of nothing but speculative assumptions.
So for me, that is a very convincing argument for God.
This is not surprising to anybody anywhere. Like, we all know that you have a very low bar for your evidence for God. This is Bill Craig, the guy who says that Pascal's wager should be convincing to atheists because you just might want that fire insurance. Paraphrasing him, obviously, but he does think that Pascal's wager, as shitty as an argument as it is, he thinks that it has value in convincing people to become Christian. And it's always confused me as to why that would convince somebody that's otherwise fairly well educated. It's totally surprising to me.
But I find that with university students, that's not the most convincing argument.
Oh, no shit. You mean people that are taught to critically think about arguments and logic using facts and science? They're not convinced by your shitty fucking philosophical argument for God that doesn't do anything other than tell us, oh, something caused the universe to inflate into existence. What could that be? You mean to tell me that college students aren't convinced by that shitty argument? Say it ain't so.
You can ignore philosophical arguments for the finitude of the past or scientific evidence for the beginning of the universe. But the argument that they find, I think, the most compelling is what I call the moral argument.
Really? Like, that's the most compelling argument. So the most compelling argument for Craig is this Kalam cosmological argument that points him to his God. But he thinks that college students, they are convinced by the moral argument, which I'm guessing he's going to explain it. But as I understand it, and maybe he can correct me on this, but my understanding is the moral argument says, oh, well, there are moral absolutes in this reality and that we experience and that we acknowledge. Therefore, there has to be some kind of absolute moral lawgiver in order to lay down the moral law and give everybody this moral foundation that we should all just intimately know from birth, or some kind of bullshit like that. I wonder if that's the moral argument he's talking about. I have a lot of problems with the moral argument, and I've discussed the moral argument several times here on the channel. But basically, I feel like even Christians are being subjective in choosing their absolute foundation. Because if we look at the past, like the Christianity's past, you'll see that their moral foundation has changed a lot over the past couple thousand years, since Christianity first began. Because when Christianity first began, women were supposed to be kept in, I guess, the kitchen or wherever in the fuck. They were subservient to the husband. The husband was at the head of the household and everything. He controlled everything. And women weren't allowed to vote. They weren't considered like the same value as men in society. The New Testament definitely values slavery, has even God in the Old Testament and in the New Testament condoning taking of slaves and owning of slaves. And then there's also, several things that we could account for, like the LGBTQ community being suppressed and targeted and killed, murdered, if you will. I mean, there's a lot of different things that Christianity has changed in its moral foundation over time, which seems to indicate to me that it's still subjective, because they're subjectively picking which parts of the Bible they want to be part of their foundation, which is no different than what anybody else does, religious or otherwise. As we experience reality, as we experience life in general, our moral foundations change. It shifts. It's very malleable. And so while we grow up in a society that establishes some kind of basic moral foundation, through our lives and through our experiences, we change our own moral foundations as to, what we think is right or wrong. And we can become convinced of alternative positions, and that changes our moral foundations, which is subjective in nature. I totally agree, but I don't think that Christians are immune to this. I think that they do the exact same things. And Christianity on the whole does the same things as social norms change in societies. So I don't see how this can be an argument for some kind of absolute moral lawgiver when Christians themselves pick and choose which particular moral attributes are the ones that are enforced by God or that God wants. It's effectively some asshole telling other people what their God wants. And that's just not convincing for some absolute moral lawgiver.
And it would go like this. One, if God does not exist, then objective moral values and duties do not exist.
I agree. Objective moral values and duties. Well, I say objective, he says objective, but what we're really talking about is absolute moral values and duties and all this other stuff. I don't think that absolute ones exist. I think that you can be objective about moral values and duties, but I don't think that the values and duties themselves can be objective in the same way. I think that you can characterize them as being absolute, but I don't think that those exist. Right from the start, he's wrong.
That is to say, in the absence of God, everything becomes socioculturally relative.
How is this a false statement? Find the false statement there, because I think that, you know, our morals are socially relative to the time, the place, the society that you live in. Hell, even subcultures within a society. All of that is part of the complex equation that goes into somebody's moral foundation. Even Christians have this complex equation for what shapes their moral foundation, because it's not just the Bible. It's a lot of other factors too. If it was just the Bible, then we wouldn't see Christians picking and choosing which moral values they want out of the Bible. You would just see the Bible state shit like, oh, you can purchase slaves from different countries and that's perfectly fucking fine. You would still see that now, but we don't. You would also see Christians out there in droves calling for the wanton murder of LGBTQ individuals, but we don't see that. We see a small fringe sect of Christians that are ostracized by the larger Christian community for calling for those things, because, you know, the regular Christians, I guess, are just sitting over there like, dude, cut it out. That's saying the quiet part out loud. We don't do that. We got to be subversive. You just, no, is essentially what they're doing there. So I totally disagree with casting off these subjective moral values and everything like that as being ridiculous, that it's, you know, affected by society and culture, even the time in which we're existing in. Like, to just throw all that out is just to ignore fucking reality.
Two, but objective moral values and duties do exist. There are some moral absolutes, some objective values and duties.
Again, we can be objective about them, right? The absolute ones, like ones that Bill Craig would probably lump into being absolute, are things that I feel are pretty normalized in most cultures nowadays, especially the culture that William Craig grew up in. Things like don't murder people. I feel like that's a pretty universal thing. We've all agreed that murder is wrong. But even then, that carries a caveat, because it's like, oh, but if it's during war times, then it can be fine. And, you know, self-defense, that's also fine. I guess technically that wouldn't be murder, though. Although God doesn't say, you know, murder's bad. What God says is, you know, don't kill, or don't kill your fellow Israelite kind of thing, which I guess you could finagle into don't murder. God goes forth and he kills a whole bunch of people in the Bible. He also orders a bunch of people to kill other people. And that's really no different than now. You've got plenty of people now that think that, oh, we should go and kill these people because my God says so. Him saying that we have these absolute values, I think, are just values that we commonly can pick out of nearly any society, and they are going to be the same values. Like, this is something that's become normalized. I think that's really what he's going for here, is that these universal or absolute morals that he's characterizing are really just sort of universal ideas that most people can get on board with, but it's still all of us agreeing, yeah, this is like a bad thing. And it takes that in order to establish some kind of societal norm, or to normalize some kind of behavior. So Bill just wants to use absolute so that he can drive you to his creator, but it's not really absolute, especially if you consider societies throughout time. Murder hasn't always been wrong in every single society. So, you know, Just keep that in mind.
3, therefore God exists. Now, this is an argument which is impossible, I think, to ignore, because every day you get up, you answer by how you treat other people, whether you regard them as having intrinsic moral value or whether they are mere means to be used for your ends.
Well, I kind of feel like what he's saying here is that every day you wake up, you choose whether or not you're a sociopath or a psychopath, rather. And that's just not how psychology works. Like, I don't get up, and I'm sure that people that don't have sociopathy or psychopathy don't wake up and decide, oh my God, honey, I'm just not going to give a flying fuck about anybody today, including you. Here's a little bit for the thing, hun. I love you. I wouldn't do that. And that's not how anybody works. It is rude to say that, huh? Yeah, I agree. You don't wake up in the morning and decide you're going to care about people. Like, that's just something psychologically that happens. Like, I don't have sociopathy, therefore I have empathy for other people. That's how human beings work. And what Bill is saying here just sort of strikes me as just crazy, because what he's saying is that without his God, without this conscious decision, like, I don't want to piss off God today, maybe I shouldn't crucify this dude over here, or, kill our neighbor Dean. Like, he fucking pissed me off yesterday, but I believe in God, and so I just don't want to disappoint him, so I guess I won't be a psychopath.
My neighbor's name is Keith.
I was trying to hide his identity, honey. Don't throw Aaron under the bus.
I said Keith.
You keep piling it on. I keep trying. But what William Lane Craig here is saying is essentially that people can't be good people without God. And if you are a good person and you don't believe in God, well, then you're still acknowledging God's existence by being a good person. This totally flies in the face of what we know about psychology and human behavior. And also, a good point here, honey, is that society predates Christianity. We have been forming societal groups for a long time before Christianity hit the scene. So KC said, nobody asked you fuckers, meaning the Christians, I guess, here. The apologists. The moral argument is not like ignored by me. I handle it all the time here on my channel. But the point is that the moral argument doesn't get you to God. The moral argument just shows how much you want to tag everything with your God. You want to attribute everything to your God. Well, William Lane Craig does here, and other apologists do too.
And so this argument, I find, tends to be the most convincing for people.
Okay, so since this argument is the most convincing to most people, as far as William Lane Craig goes, I think that anybody that's espousing the moral argument should be challenged on it, asking them about Christianity's history with white nationalism, Christianity's history with other fascist dictatorships, and how they have used the Bible in order to inflict their own personal version of God's commandments or God's moral absolutes. But you not only have that, you have in the wider Christian community, you could challenge somebody on this whole idea of slavery and how that was abolished later on because we came to our fucking senses. I mean, kind of like eventually we're starting to get around to coming to our senses about, hey, everybody, we're all human here. The Christians definitely didn't feel that way. Not that, other people weren't human, but just that the people that had inherent value or that were valuable were Christians. Everybody else didn't matter. Their lives didn't matter. That changed in Christianity. Now we have more progressive theologies of Christianity that say that everybody has intrinsic value. Hell, even William Lane Craig here, he says that everybody has intrinsic value, but that is not what the original Christian theology was, and nor was it the majority of Christianity's history. That wasn't the theology for them. So how do you explain these things? If you're a Christian and you're watching this, or religious, or, somebody that wants to defend the moral argument, I just need to know, why did things change if God's morals are absolute? The morals that are recorded in the Bible, if these morals are absolute, then it would make sense that slavery is a moral action, that, subjugating your wife and making her be subservient to you and Christ is a moral thing to do. Why isn't it moral now to go out and just kill LGBTQ people? These are major aspects of Christian theology that need to be explained, but I don't hear any explanations for it. So if you have one, please give it to me in the comments below. That's going to be it for Bill Craig's video here. I did not find it convincing. In fact, I feel like it's on par with his low bar opinions. And I also think that Ben Shapiro is kind of a little dick. I don't like Ben Shapiro. Hate me in the comments all you want to, but I really don't like him. Anyways, if you will, please go down below. Let me know what you thought about this video. Do you think that Bill Craig highlighted the two most important arguments to use for Christianity, or the most compelling at least? Or do you think that he maybe needs to go back to the whiteboard a little bit there? Let me know down below in the comments. And while you're down there, why don't you smash that like button and subscribe if you like this kind of content. Don't forget to stand up and use your voice. Bye, heathens.